Good morning, Jim. You have a beautiful background. I guess you're already in the office.
I am here in the Boston Seaport area.
Wow. I'm jealous you already been able to get back to office. How are you doing?
I'm doing great, thank you. And I hope you're well as well.
Absolutely. So, Jim, I'll dive into the questions. I'm a CEO of a multi-billion dollar technology company, and you would have had several products in the pipeline. And when the pandemic hit in March, and how did you, kind of rile up your troops and get these products out in the market? Because your customers are expecting a lot of these releases.
Yeah, and in fact, we shipped a release of what we call Creo 7 shortly, into this pandemic work from home environment. And it's kind of an example of how product development really should work going forward, because because we're developing a digital product, everything we do is digital. So a release of Creo involves about 500 engineers in Pune, India, in Israel, in Boston, and in really a few other locations, all working together for about a year. But every single part of it is digital and really has been for a while. So whether you work from home or work for the office, doesn't actually matter that much. You just keep doing what you do. So I hold that out as an example of how all product development processes should work to make them so resilient, because everybody got sent home and, we didn't miss a beat shipping this massive, feat of engineering, if you will, involving 500 people.
And Jim, your teams were able to work from home and use the laptops and work on it. But if you look at the cloud adoption in CAD, in PLM, you've seen adoption accelerate over the last few years. But CAD, the adoption has been slower. I was talking to one of the large OEMs. They said they have this massive high-performance computers in the desktop next to the engineers using some of your software. Why is it the change has not happened in so many years? And is this crisis going to accelerate? What are the early signals are you seeing?
Yeah, I mean, this crisis is a big wake-up call that CAD needs to change. If you think about the way CAD works, whether it's ours or frankly anybody else's, it usually involves a big workstation at the office. And on this workstation, you have the CAD software loaded. You might have some analysis software. You have a lot of memory and a great big graphics card, a big monitor, and you download data from perhaps a PLM server, and then you work in that local package. The problem is that workstation's in the office, it's not at home. And very few people have such a workstation at home. And even if they did, they don't have the software and they don't have the license codes and so forth. So CAD did not really work that well in the early days of the pandemic. And really what people have been forced to do is use, for example, virtual desktop infrastructure, which, trust me, is painful because all the benefits of that local graphics card and so forth are lost. So I'd say people are limping along with CAD infrastructures. And what we really need is for CAD to be more like most enterprise software, where it just runs on a server in the cloud, and you just use a web browser or a lightweight desktop application to window into it, more or less. And so actually at PTC, shortly before the pandemic, just by fortunate circumstance, I guess, PTC acquired a cloud-based CAD system, a company called Onshape, which was founded by the same guys who previously built SolidWorks, so very, very accomplished CAD entrepreneurs and engineers. And they developed a system that's 100% server-based. All of the application remains in the cloud. All of the data at all times remains in the cloud. It's a multi-tenant, multi-user CAD experience. By the way, if anybody in the audience wants to try it, go to ptc.com/respirator, and you'll launch yourself into a CAD session on whatever device you're using. So this has the benefit of you can move around, you can work from anywhere, you can use a Windows machine, a Mac, a phone, a tablet, and do the same kind of engineering work that you used to do on that great big heavy workstation back at the office. So I think the world's going to move quickly to this type of infrastructure. Not super quickly because, there's a lot of data and a lot of users and so forth. But this really, if you want a resilient work environment, this is where you need to go. And I think the industry is going to move there fairly quickly.
And you think customers will move from, so you Creo to Onshape, or you're planning to get Creo also onto the cloud? using some of the platform technologies you acquired from Onshape?
Yeah, Onshape is kind of a mid-range, low-end to mid-range product, more of the likes of, say, Autodesk Inventor or SolidWorks or Solid Edge. So we'll position Onshape as kind of a lower end or mid-market type of product, and Creo really is a high-end product. But we do have a plan to come out with a version of Creo in some time here that shares the Onshape SaaS architecture. So then you'll either be able to run a version of Creo that's very much compatible with the Creo that used to run on that big workstation at the office, or you'll be able to, make the choice to go with Onshape, which will be a brand new kind of, fresh start at a CAD system. So it really means, do you want all the innovation in the world that's Onshape, or do you really want continuity with all the data and learnings and process and so forth that you have, in which case you'd go with Creo in the cloud.
Interesting. So you have both the options for companies, and so now that moving.
Just to be clear, we don't have both options yet, but that's the direction we're heading.
Okay, super. And moving on, you serve more industrial companies, right? Who are kind of lagging behind in terms of technology adoption compared to pure digital native companies and tech companies. And a lot of them had made their global supply chain very efficient over the last decade by working in Asian different countries and so on. But the US-China trade tensions seems to be, at least when we speak to some of the CTOs of large companies, they talk about decoupling of the supply chain. But when they move the supply chain back into the US, it's not going to be the same cost as what they're doing in China. And do you see that the technology adoption, the Industry 4.0, it's been talked about for several years, and you had made massive investments in things like IoT. Is that going to accelerate? So what has been your learning in the last few months?
Yeah, I think you're starting to hear in the US here, you're starting to hear this word reshoring a lot. And it really means reduce the risk of having a supply chain in places that get all caught up in trade wars and pandemics and so forth. And I think reshoring only works with high degrees of automation. If you bring back a labor-intensive process and you run it as a labor-intensive process in the US, you're going to have two problems. First of all, that type of labor is actually fairly hard to find in the US. Even during the pandemic, there's not that much of that frontline workforce available. And the second problem, of course, is the cost would be outrageous. So I think that companies are going to have to move to a smart factory model in the US. Lots of automation, but lots of IoT and lots of augmented reality and so forth, so that moving those resources or moving that process back, let's say, needs to be less about labor and more about digital automation, so that you can still be competitive out in the marketplace.
And do these organizations have the internal capability to do analytics, or are they coming back to you and say, hey, it's great you've deployed it, but how do we now analyze it? How do we get insights out of it? Are there interesting conversations you're having in those areas?
Yeah, I mean, to be honest, a lot of customers admit they don't have this kind of capability, this digital capability in their manufacturing enterprise. Some think they do. Some actually do, but even amongst those who think they do, they're probably overstating their capabilities. And I think, Pari, you and I know some customers who really do need help in order to build that smart factory type of process. They don't have the headcount, they don't have the talent. They're going to need to turn to outside suppliers for services and technology, software, and so forth, in order to really get that working in a timely manner. There's a lot of false starts when people try to do something that they've never done before, and then only realize it was a much bigger project than they thought it was, and they really don't understand how to do it. So I think it's going to be good for services companies and good business, of course, for software technology companies like PTC.
Got it. So the entire value chain is going to benefit from the adoption over the next few years.
Yeah, for sure.
And we talked about work from home. You mentioned about your product teams moving back, because they are working on digital platforms. But 75% of the workers in the world today they have to go physically to work for them to make a living. Manufacturing workers, the healthcare professionals, retail professionals, and so on. How do you see them adopting technology over the next decade? Is there So what's your insights around that?
Yeah, I mean, I think that knowledge workers have done really just fine during this pandemic and work from home. But I'm saying knowledge workers, and that's people who, like me, who mostly look at a computer screen all day. If your job involves looking at a computer screen, well, you can look at a computer screen at home too. But if your job involves interacting with the real world in a factory or a plant or a hospital or what have you, you can't do that from home. It's not, the real world's not there. So, frontline workers really have not fared so well. They didn't get saved by digital technology. In fact, a lot of them barely use digital technology most of the time. So I think that digital has done amazing things for knowledge workers, and it's sort of passed over frontline workers. But I do think there's a way to fix it, and it's why I'm so excited about augmented reality. If you think about like this discussion we're having right now, it's digital information on a computer screen. But what frontline workers need is digital information on the real world. The machine they're working on, or the assembly that they're adding parts to. They need that to have digital information, and that's what augmented reality does. It augments the real world with digital information, and it's a great way to train workers, to guide them through a process, to mentor them digitally and remotely, debug problems. It's a terrific way to bring digital to the frontline workforce. And, our augmented reality business has absolutely exploded during this COVID crisis because people realize I need a way to do remote support and debugging and training and coaching and mentoring. And, using Zoom calls and WebEx calls, that's useless because I actually need to talk to the worker in the context of the environment the worker works in. And that's what augmented reality is all about. So I sometimes say, just for fun, I sometimes say that augmented reality is IoT for people. It is a way to connect people to the internet, in the same way that you connect machines. It's just people need a modem because they don't have an Ethernet port and they don't have a Wi-Fi capability. And so they need a modem that converts bits and bytes to sounds and sights. And that's exactly what an AR device, whether it's a phone, tablet, HoloLens, or whatever, it's converting bits and bytes from the cloud into sounds and sights that you see in the environment. And then when you do things in the environment, that gets converted back to bits and bytes and sent back to the cloud. So conceptually, a person wearing a HoloLens looks to me like a machine with a Raspberry Pi sensor pack on it. Same concept.
So it's very, very, very exciting, how Euphoria is going to be used across manufacturing and other frontline workers. But if you look at the sales process to sell into industrial companies, it's been a very high touch, right? They need physical presence. And I've been to your Seaport office. You have this awesome experience center where you host CXOs to come and experience what is possible. Now that you have to do all this remotely, are there different business models, sales models? Are you trying to make it frictionless? And what has been the experience of doing that?
Yeah, I mean, we could run a sales process to a degree digitally, including meetings like this. The problem though is IoT is where the physical world meets the digital world. And at some point, you do have to be in the physical world. You have to take inventory, for example, of all the equipment in a factory to come up with a strategy of how you would connect all that equipment and what kind of value you could create by doing so. So I think that in the moment, it's a bit of a bottleneck that we can't go to customer sites and sit down with them in their physical environment. But I do think it really leads to the spatial computing discussion. There are ways to virtualize spaces. And if we virtualize spaces, then we can actually go into that factory and walk around digitally and really kind of, project ourselves into some remote physical place and observe what's there and even interact with it, using IoT technology. So I do think there are some breakthroughs on the horizon that are going to be pretty exciting. And, that kind of leads us to the spatial computing discussion.
Interesting. One other question I had on the sales model itself. I know Euphoria Chalk you announced it for free for a few months.
Did, yeah.
Is that increasing adoption? The customers can use it, then they can go back and buy if they like the product?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, and anybody on the webcast here can go to ptc.com/free chalk and download this AR software and use it for free. Um, what we decided in this moment where the pandemic hit, we knew that this Vuforia chalk, it's called chalk because it's like a chalk talk. You can
Okay.
see where a remote worker is, and you can mark in their environment, and they see your marks in their environment, while you're talking to them. So you're having a chalk talk in their environment while having a video call. And we knew that would be immensely useful. And suddenly everybody needed it. We just didn't know how to engage everybody in the sales cycle. So we said, guess what? It's free. And the usage of this technology absolutely soared. I'm talking like an order of magnitude more usage immediately followed. And so, we think that's an interesting model, actually, kind of a freemium model, if you will, for the rest of the Vuforia AR suite is let people come to understand what augmented reality is about using a very simple product. You go into production in literally 5 minutes, and then try it out and then come back and we'll tell you about all the other things that augmented reality could do in terms of knowledge transfer, in terms of publishing information into the real world and so forth. There's a whole suite of capabilities. But this chalk technology is, very powerful and very, very simple.
Got it. So there's one question coming in from the audience. There's several. I'm just picking up. There's one on 3D printing, and what do you think is the future of 3D printing in a post-pandemic and a manufacturing world?
Yeah, I mean, at PPC we spend a lot of energy on 3D printing, also on generative design, which is, once you're printing parts, now you have a lot more design freedom as well, because a lot of design is kind of working backwards from traditional manufacturing processes. So I think it's very interesting and can play many roles. The problem with 3D printing still is just the volume. It's just too slow to use for a high volume process. And so it tends to get used in a lot of low volume processes and maybe for spare parts applications and prototyping and jigs and fixtures and stuff like that. But, I think we're still a ways away from the point where high volume parts can be 3D printed just because the process takes too long. But that day is coming for sure, and I'm a big believer in it.
Absolutely, and you've been pioneering some of these newer technology areas. Talking about it, I've read the systems of systems concept. You and Michael Porter published together in HDR and IoT even before the IoT became mainstream. Then you talked about AR. Way before it became mainstream. So what do you think the future holds for us? What is your view on the next generation, technology from an industrial company adoption perspective?
Yeah, Michael and I are actually working on another paper right this moment that really is on this concept of spatial computing. So let me try to build up to it. Let's say we have a factory, and in this factory there's a lot of equipment or assets, and there's a lot of workers. Okay, and they're all working together. The machines and the people are working together in a process, and the process lives within a building called a factory. So IoT is about remote monitoring and optimization of the physical assets, the machines. And I'd argue augmented reality is about remote monitoring and optimization of the workers, IoT for people. And so today we have two independent ways to optimize workers and machines. But if we step back and said, if I had an understanding of the geometry, the actual spatial model of that plant, and then I could place the machines and the people in there and kind of monitor that using depth sensing cameras, it would be like I was there because I would see what's happening. I could move around in it, and I could actually monitor the machines and the people and send data to either one of them. I could walk the plant from my living room, and I could interact with the workers and the machines and so forth. So spatial computing really takes the idea of IoT and AR and adds the concept of space, that these workers and these machines are in a building together and they're moving around, and there may be more efficient ways for them to move around and interact with each other and for the process to flow and so forth. So to me, spatial computing is the uber idea, the bigger idea that blends IoT and AR in any kind of an industrial work site with an understanding of the work site too.
Very interesting. And Jim, so another question I had for you was, You've been pioneering some of these ideas, and also you're running one is to pioneer an idea as an academic person, but pioneering an idea as a CEO and making a bet on that. Are you ever worried that you get the timing wrong because you spent $1 billion in a certain technology bet and maybe you got it 10 years before? So
Yeah,
how do you?
I worry. I worry all the time. But I've been pretty lucky actually because we've made very big bets, including big acquisitions. Like this acquisition of Onshape. We paid $470 million for a very small company. That's trying to do SaaS CAD, and then COVID hits, and suddenly everybody needs SaaS CAD. I mean, that was fortunate. But I think we're pretty in tune with trends, and you can kind of see patterns of how things have developed. Most software, for example, has moved to the cloud. And if you say, why hasn't CAD? Well, it's because of that workstation I described. But what if we could come up with models to solve that problem so you didn't need that big graphics card and that big monitor and that, memory and so forth? Could you make CAD work in the cloud if you could solve some of those, technical challenges? Yeah, I think you could, and it would probably take over like crazy. So I think we study trends a lot. We study patterns that have happened in other industries that might happen here. And then, probably myself and some of my colleagues who participate in these planning exercises with me, we have good intuition. And then, last of all, we have some luck. But, I think people that have, good intuition and do good studying and planning, tend to have more luck too. It's the two go together.
Absolutely, and so one of the other things we have several entrepreneurs listening to this talk, and in the future, if people are looking to partner or get acquired by PTC, what are the areas they should focus on? And any advice for entrepreneurs, building technology companies?
Yeah, I mean, for sure, these ideas of IoT and AR, VR, and spatial computing, we're in the very early days of what's possible there. And PTC continues to buy small companies because they came up with some great idea. For example, we recently acquired a small company in Germany that didn't even make the news, but they let's say you're using augmented reality to explain a work instruction to a worker. Well, they do video analytics to make sure the worker followed that work instruction correctly, that the hand motions were correct, and that the resulting output looks right. Right. So now we're not only explaining to the worker, but we're validating that what they did was correct. And again, so there's a little acquisition there. But I think this is a rich area. And for entrepreneurs, I encourage you to check out our Vuforia Spatial Toolbox. You can find it on our website. It's open source, so that you can take this technology, go play around with it, come up with your own ideas, go build a great company and come back and pitch it to me. And I'll be happy to buy it if it fits in real well.
Great. I'm pretty sure a lot of them would be lining up in some time that they build these technologies. Thanks a lot, Jim. It was great discussing some of the trends with you across AR, IoT, spatial computing, and what are some of the future post-pandemic. What are some of the areas we can focus on as an industry? Thanks a lot. Have a great day.
All right. Thank you, Pari. Thanks for inviting me. Bye, everybody.
Bye. Over to you, Nivedita.